In case there is a quick overview, this arises from the first king's pawn move, pawn 4, and when you respond, pawn to e5, there are different obnoxious moves that your opponent can play against you, such as either bishop c4 first or bringing their queen out to either h5 or maybe to f3, and from there they're aiming, in both cases, at this vulnerable square on f7. So we're gonna talk about all those options and how we can completely punish white for trying one of them. Okay, so let's say you had queen h5. One of the common ways here, they're hoping to snatch this pawn e5 if you're careless, and if you defend it, they're playing their real stuff, bishop to c4, aiming for this scholar's checkmate. Now, again, if you're careless and play something like not f6, you run right into this scholar's checkmate. And that's definitely what you should avoid. Instead, black normally plays pawn g6, then white drops back their queen to f3, renewing the checkmating threat once again. Here the right way is knight to f6. At this point, white is at a crossroad. They may keep playing aggressively, trying to beat you quickly within a couple of moves with different little tricks. Or they may switch back to a kind of normal chat, saying, okay, this didn't work out, but still, I have this active queen along this file, and maybe I'm gonna play something like d3. Bishop g5, put this pin, and just transition into a more normal chess attack. Again, in both cases, I'll show you really effective solutions, but let's start off with the most aggressive options of white. Those triggers often will go for the most aggressive moves. One of them is pawn g4. White is relentless in their pursuit of the scholar's checkmate. They want to play g5, drive this knight away, and still play queen takes f7. What do I do in this case? Well, the first thing is, we don't really want to defend because white's attack isn't sound, and we want to punish white. We want to counterattack. Of course, we've got to be careful because, if somehow you move this knight away, indeed, you get a retracted checkmate. Therefore, you need to watch where this queen can go. But basically, we do not want to defend, we want to counterattack, and you achieve that here with the move knight to d4. So instead of dealing with this threat, we start our counterattack. We attack the queen over here as well as this pawn on c2, which is really bad for white because from there, the knight is going to fork the king and the rook, which forces white's queen to go all the way back to d1, probably. At this point, you could just take this pawn on e4. But again, we're going to be brutal, so one pawn is not enough. We're going to play pawn d5, attacking this version but also opening up our own bishop so that he can get involved in our attack. With no additional time, after pawn takes here, now the bishop comes out to g4, hitting the queen once again. At this point, white may regret their decision to try the scholar's checkmate against you, but now it is too late. What can they really do? They've got to cover their queen somehow. Doing this with a knight really doesn't work because of knight to f3. Check to the king, and king f1 leads to a pretty nice checkmate delivered by just the bishop and the knight. So that's definitely not the solution for white, and usually, they don't play this. Instead, let's take a couple of moves back here. They usually play pawn f3, hoping to gain a tempo by attacking your version, but you play another nice move, knight to e4. At first, it may seem like there's some weird challenge to put as many minor pieces on the first rank as you can, but that's not the case. Knight to e4 actually aims to continue your attack. Okay, so first of all, they cannot take it because then they'll expose their queen. And you'll grab it, but what if they grab the bishop in this case? Well, you play queen h4, that was actually the intent of moving your knight, so that clears the path for the queen. And now queen h4 checks the king, and it has to go to f1, and then queen to f2. Rephrasing an ancient saying, those who use the scholar's checkmate will die by the scholar's checkmate. Another aggressive attempt by white in this critical position of the scholar's checkmate is to move queen to b3, kind of in the style of white dancing around with their queen, desperately trying to get to this pawn on f7 and get you in trouble. Most players here play queen to e7, trying to defend the pawn, but instead, there is a move that is a lot more aggressive and, of course, a lot stronger. It actually wins the game right away. It's the move knight to d4. Once again, we counterattack the queen with the same move, knight to d4, and similarly, the knight here hits the pawn on c2 as well. Therefore, the queen can't go far away anyway. Now, I will be happy to grab the pawn because that was the aim of their last move, and our king goes to e7. Now white is in trouble, actually, because the queen has to maintain the guard of this bishop. If not, it's going to be captured by the king, but it also has to keep maintaining the guard of this pawn. The only normal move is queen to c4, but then he plays b5 to drive this queen away, and in most cases, they do play queen to c5. But actually, white is lost anyway, and after queen to c5, you could just take the bishop. But since we decided to be brutal and to make white suffer, I recommend the move pawn d6. Instead of just grabbing the bishop, we're hunting for a bigger fish. We want to grab the queen because notice that there aren't that many squares for the queen to go to. Also, if it goes somewhere like b4 or a3, you can always grab over here, delivering a check to the king and attacking the queen. Therefore, all the squares from c2 are basically unavailable for the queen. So, let's take it back. That's why they're gonna play queen to c3, at least trying to defend the pawn. Again, you could take the bishop, but instead, we play knight takes e4. We keep the hunt of the queen going. You know, again, your knights as well as the bishop from h3 control pretty much all the squares around, so they're gonna play queen to d3. You still play knight c5, keeping the attack on the queen. It looks like the variation is long, but basically, we keep attacking the queen all the time, and therefore, it's easy to find those moves. Queen goes to b4, c3, now we go pawn b4, attacking it once again, and it still has to maintain the guard of these pawns, so queen c4 is forced. Now bishop a6 keeps chasing the queen. Queen d5 is the only square available, and then we lock the door with the move pawn to c6. Now, finally enough, the queen is trapped in the middle of the board, right on d5, and I think that's a really great punishment for white so that they realize that just dancing around with their queen in the opening is a bad strategy. So now we just win it. Besides these two aggressive options of white that we just analyzed, white can also shift gears and try to go into more normal chess with something like d3, c3, or knight e2. I recorded that video not long ago where I covered all these variations and how you can beat white in that case. Therefore, I recommend that you check it out later. For now, let me show you another version of the scholar's checkmate that is often used by stronger opponents at this position. Instead of playing queen h5, which is a more beginner-level attempt, many of the stronger, reliable players will start off with the move bishop c4, pretending like they are playing normal chess. Then, regardless of whether you play knight f6 or knight c6, or basically any other move, let's say knight c6, they play queen to f3, hoping for a couple of things. The first thing is that you could pre-move your next move, something like bishop c5. And then they'll just deliver this queen takes f7 checkmate. Also, their other hope is that, after you, let's say, play knight f6 once again, they can try to shift to a kind of more normal chess. They tried out this quick trap against you, it didn't work out, and they say, okay, let me try some normal chess now, and a little bit postpone their attack. In this position, they play something like pawn c3 to cover this square d4. They're aware of your knight aiming at this square, so they cover that. As I said, stronger level opponents sometimes play that, aiming for, you know, some d3 and bishop g5 in the future and to develop their attack a little bit later. In this position, of course, usually people just develop like normal, developing in chess, but our goal is to punish white, right? So we're gonna play aggressively. And one of the common classical chess rules is that you get a counterstrike in the center when your opponent plays some weird attack on the side. And we're gonna do just that with the move pawn d5, which is another common attacking pattern here for black to start their counterattack. When white captures, and you can't recapture right away because this pawn is defended twice, if you capture it, you just lose the knight. But if you instead counterattack with the move pawn e4, counterattack the queen, forcing it to move, and in most cases, white plays the wrong move, queen e3. But, you know, you have a really nice attacking game in any case. Let's say the queen goes to e3. Now, again, instead of just taking the pawn, because, in that case, you lose this pawn on e4, you could instead move this knight to e5. Once again, you keep attacking with your approach. This time, we're attacking the bishop, and as it goes back, they usually play bishop to b3. Then your knight can happily land on d3, putting white's king in trouble. So, we've already managed to turn the table around. And now you are attacking the king as well as the bishop on c1. Therefore, they move their king to d1, but now you can bring out your bishop with a tempo, hitting the queen and indirectly, you know, threatening this pawn on f2. So, basically, you are already winning. After the queen moves to g3, you know you could, of course, just play knight takes f2. You know, winning this pawn, but instead, there is a stronger move, and I want to challenge you to find it on your own. So, let this be the puzzle of the day, black to play and win. What is another move, besides knight takes f2, that can win the game for black? If you can find it, please write it down in the comments below. We've just analyzed the move pawn to c3, where you counterstrike with the move pawn d5. And then you unleash your attack against white. The second most popular option for white is playing pawn d3, opening up for the bishop to go to g5. Trying to continue putting pressure on you. But in this case, the d4 square is available, so we happily land our knight there, forcing the queen to go back because it has to defend against the weakness on c2. Therefore, we push the queen all the way back to d1. Now we'll play our typical move, pawn d5. You know, if you can play it, you're happy, you already got the initiative. Now, pawn takes, and there are different ways to go about this, but I recommend a simple approach. Just take the pawn so that you don't mess up with anything else. Just take it, and your position is nice. Usually, they're annoyed by your two strong knights. So they play pawn c3, and you move your knight back. And here, guess what they play? Yes, they once again play the same trick, queen to f3. They're trying for the same scholar's checkmate twice within the same game, insane. They're attacking the knight, hoping that you're gonna move it somewhere. And then they'll play queen takes f7 checkmate. Of course, we're not gonna do that. Instead, you're gonna play the normal move, bishop e6, defending the knight, and your position is perfectly fine. But then they play another tricky move, knight to h3. This time, they're aiming for knight to g5, and from here, they're gonna put more pressure on the weaknesses, as well as on d5 directly. So, we stop it with a simple pawn to h6. Now they cannot find any more attacking moves, and they are forced to castle. Now, most players, when playing as black, play some normal development moves, such as bishop to e7, and that is fine. But again, our goal is not just to play normal chess, right? We're going to be merciless and punish white for their wrong play in the opening. So we're gonna play a bold move, pawn to g5. Our goal is to play pawn g4, which is a double attack on the queen and the knight. By the way, even if there were no queen on f3, g4 traps the knight anyway because it has nowhere to go. Therefore, white is defenseless, they cannot do anything against this simple threat. And then we grab the knight. They do try their last trick, queen h5, which pins this pawn, and so they hope for some knight takes g5 stuff anyway. But again, you just gotta be careful, always watch over this queen and what white aims to do. So, we play knight f6 and kick it away. The queen is forced to go back now, and then we finally play pawn g4 anyway, and we reach our goal, the knight is trapped. White can try to trade off the bishops, but it doesn't change anything. The knight is still trapped. It may look like your king is a little bit exposed, but that's not a problem, actually. Because you know we're gonna grab this knight. White still has just a single queen in the game, and they cannot possibly checkmate you with just a single queen. Your king is actually well surrounded by lots of defenders, so you don't need to worry about that. Moreover, after you grab the knight here, you're actually gonna attack along the g-file. So, white's king is in much bigger trouble here, and you can always castle queenside on the next move. All in all, your position is absolutely winning. Thanks for watching and subscribe the channel.